Good evening. My name is Art McKee. I'm from Winnipeg, and I want to welcome all of you to the fourth session of Japanese Canadians in Manitoba. It's a Spirit of Japanese Canadians in Manitoba series. And tonight we have two renowned authors, three actually, who will be presenting their works to us. I'd like to indicate to you that we are on, acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 land, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Oji-Cree, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'd like to ask Kelly Kaita, the president of Japanese Cultural Association Manitoba, to bring greetings. Kelly?
Thank you, Art. Welcome, everyone. I want to thank each and every one of you for attending our fourth session of Safe at Home, a wonderful virtual event sponsored by our government of Manitoba to help people deal with the COVID pandemic and provide entertainment and knowledge to those who can no longer come to our center anyways. And I think it's really provided us a wonderful opportunity to showcase not only our local talent, but our national talent. So I also wanted to thank, Lillian Michiko and Jeff Chiba Stearns and Tetsuro for making the time to be with us tonight. So on behalf of JCAM, welcome, and let's begin the session. Art.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. The way we have it arranged tonight is that Tetsuro will be making the first presentation of his work. Tetsuro apparently is teaching classes, so we've arranged to have him go first. Tetsuro, who's a playwright of 1 Hour Photo, which is his latest work, but he was a former writer for This Hour It's 22 Minutes, and his voice is already familiar to many Canadians from his days of hosting Roundup on CBC. And I used to listen to Tetsuro. He doesn't realize that, but anyways, he was also on a reality show called The Deadliest Warrior. I think that's where he was like a ninja fighter, something like that, Tetsuro? But anyways, this evening, he wants to showcase his newest work, but he'll tell you a little bit about himself through his other work. So Tetsuro, I'll let you take over. And by the way, we will have questions and answers after. And so if anyone has questions, could you put it on the chat line, and then we can pick it up when he completes his presentation. Thank you. Tetsuro, turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Art, and thank you for that excellent introduction. I see some new friends and old friends. Les, hello. Kelly and I were just reminiscing prior to everyone entering the room about the last time I was in Winnipeg, and you all were so generous to invite me out to MC your gala dinner for the JCAM in 2019, and that was so memorable. So it's wonderful having this kind of virtual reunion, and I do hope I'm able to get back to Winnipeg in order to see community and old friends in person again. I want to start off by just giving you a brief overview of the next 30 minutes or so. As Art mentioned, there's going to be a little bit of time at the end for questions and answers. If there are no questions, we'll just spend that 10 minutes in awkward silence, but the sound of silence is very beautiful. Prior to that, I want to tell you about 1 Hour Photo, because I'm hoping, in fact, you will be able to catch it through Prairie Theatre Exchange. It's running virtually at their theater. So Art will give you some more details about that. But just by way of introduction, because most of you, of course, do not have any idea who's this weird guy with the weird facial hair, I want to begin with a brief excerpt from one of an autobiographical show I do called Empire of the Sun. And this was sort of the show that put me on the map, so to speak, within Vancouver theater, and was able to introduce to Vancouverites and beyond the story of at least one Japanese Canadian family. So again, this is an autobiographical show. It's about my relationship with my Japanese father. As you can probably hear, I'm a Nikkei. My father was from Kagoshima, a real old school samurai, and you can kind of imagine, or from your own experience, understand what that relationship was like. So the story I'm about to perform for you is about 3/4 of the way through the show. My father, his health is not great, and that was part of the catalyst for me creating this show. And just for your viewing pleasure, I'm going to be very un-Japanese, very un-Canadian, and invite you to maybe put me on speaker view, just so you will indulge my actorly ego to be larger, a little bit larger on screen, should you prefer. If you want my mug to be nice and small, I commend you for your excellent judgment. But for those who want the spotlight, so to speak, feel free to go to speaker view, or maybe Kelly can put me in the spotlight or what have you. But I'll leave you to view this following excerpts, about 5 or 6 minutes long, any way you like. Okay, and so I want you to imagine that I'm there at Prairie Theatre Exchange, and on stage, oh, thank you, Kelly. Behind me is a screen, and on this screen during my theater show, Facebook images from my personal feed come up every once in a while in order to illustrate the story that I'm telling. And this story, as I mentioned, takes place towards the end of my father's life, and I am going to share that with you now. Every time my father went into the hospital, it seemed less and less likely that he'd ever come out. A conference call with my sisters. How's Dad doing? Should we come? And I stopped. My sisters never asked my advice about anything. I'm the baby of the family, but here they were. Tetsuro, tell us, do we need to come? If they didn't come and something happened to my dad, I would never live it down. But for some reason, I just couldn't bring myself to say it. So I said over the phone, listen closely, because I'm only going to say this once. No one here is telling you not to come. My sisters booked their flights from all points to Vancouver, indirect flights, weird connections, and by some coincidence, they all landed within 30 minutes of each other at YVR. As they all piled into my car, everyone is giddy, literally giggling. Sure, the circumstances were crappy, but this was an impromptu family reunion. We only saw each other once a year, if that, but now we were all together, and everyone was so happy. And at this point, illuminating behind me on stage is a photo, and I'll just give you the black and white version for now, but I'll give you a sense. This is the actual photo taken from my Facebook, and this is the very moment I picked up my sisters from the hospital. As I began driving towards St. Paul's Hospital, one of my sisters said to me, oh, by the way, and at this point, you can actually hear my sisters' actual voices coming over the speakers. And you know it's my sisters because they're such terrible actors. It really sounds like they're playing themselves, so to speak. Oh, by the way, we're not really here for Dad. Yeah, that was just the pretext. Yeah, the real reason we're here is because we decided it was high time to stage an intervention on your mustache. We're serious. We think your look is socially aggressive and aggressively antisocial. Yeah, it's really gonna limit your opportunities. You see, you look untrustworthy, dubious, supercilious, insouciant, oleaginous. Did I mention my sisters all scored within the top 1 percentile on their SATs? What are you talking about? This is a handlebar mustache. It's a classic gentleman's mustache. Yeah, well, maybe that's the look you're going for, but As an Asian, it just looks like you have 2 question marks on your face. Questionable look, questionable character. When my sisters say crap like that, deep down, I know they're probably right. They're always staging these interventions on me, half joking, half serious. But secretly, I was just happy not to have to talk about my father's condition. They'd see for themselves soon enough. When we got to my father's hospital room, without a word, my sisters dropped their coats and their bags, and they climbed into bed with my dad. That blew my mind. They could have levitated, and I would have been less impressed. But they lay in bed with him, and they touched him the way daughters touch their fathers when there's a lot of love. All these hours I'd been spending with my father, feeding him chips of ice, bringing him heated blankets, describing the weather outside his window. I can honestly say it never occurred to me to climb into his bed, to lay next to him, to touch him, in the manner in which my brother and I express affection towards our father. We're like 2 characters trapped in a Frank Capra movie. My brother is a pastor, and his favorite movie is It's a Wonderful Life. And together, we're about as fulsome in our expressions of affection as Jimmy Stewart. Well, gee, Pa, just try and hang in there, will you? And hand to God, you'll be as right as rain. Our brotherly love is in black and white, but my sister's love is in Technicolor and in surround sound. And at this point, on the other side of the stage, a pin spot appears, and there, illuminated as if by magic, is a simple microphone stand. And I walk over to that mic stand, and you can imagine the following lines as if there was a bit of echo, a bit of reverb. But my sister's love is in Technicolor and in surround sound. My sisters are multilingual in the languages of love. They coo and cluck and purr with mellifluous felicity. They speak in tongues, not because the Spirit has descended upon them, but because it never left. Make no mistake, my sisters are grown women, mothers, but not matronly. Maybe magicians, maybe Wiccans, because in the blink of an eye, they become little girls again, cooing, affectionate little girls. Good night, Daddy. Aishiteru. I love you. While my brother and I remain like British beefeaters, arms by our side, silent, while my sisters shapeshift into a basket full of kittens, and with every kiss, they bring him back from the brink of death. And if this isn't magic, then I don't know what is. And as I stand there, slack-jawed and dumb in the corner of the room, all I can think is, there are cultures in this world that prize sons over daughters. I know, because I come from one of them. So stupid. When my father's condition stabilized, my sisters had to go back to their regular lives, and this is the other picture that appears. This is a picture of my sisters with my father in the hospital. And that picture gradually disappears. When my father's condition stabilized, my sisters had to go back to their regular lives, but let me tell you, their example was not lost on me. I mean, I didn't want to do it right in front of them, but as soon as they were down that hospital corridor, as soon as they disappeared into that hospital elevator, I was on that bed, right on the edge. But I leaned over and I patted my father's knee like nobody was watching. And that is an excerpt from Empire of the Sun. And at this moment, I will ask Kelly to take me off the the spotlight so I can see everyone's beautiful faces, and maybe we can make this next section maybe a little bit more interactive as I talk to you about my next show, 1 Hour Photo. So it was actually the success of Empire of the Sun that enabled Heather Redfern, who is the artistic director of the Culch. She asked me, what is my next play? Because she was excited because this had done fairly well with audiences. And I said, well, I want to tell the story of my father's friend, and his name is Mas Yamamoto. And the reason why I wanted to tell his story was, well, it all began with the fact that I moved into his daughter's house, who became my landlord. And the funny thing about moving into someone else's home is no matter how clean they leave it for you, kind of like doing Airbnb, they can't help but leave behind so many clues. And for me, the clue that so intrigued me was a mug, of all things, that said, Japan Camera. Now, I realize that's a reference that not everyone picks up, but back in the day, I explained on stage that there used to be things as getting your rolls of film developed, and how 1 hour photos were a really big breakthrough. And as I began examining his past, it turns out that his life so closely followed the major currents of the 20th century. He grew up on the banks of the Fraser River, the son of a Japanese fisherman who emigrated from Yokohama. As a boy, he was incarcerated in the internment camp, and the first love of his life was, get this is a name some of you may recognize, so I hope you'll forgive this as name dropping, but his first love of his life was Midge Ayukawa, who of course some of you know as a real scholar and activist and giant within our community. And Midge's family was kind enough to invite me out to Ottawa and grant me permission to look at Midge's photo albums. And I got to see the photographs that Mas sent to Midge as they had this sort of long-distance teenage love affair post-internment. Mas's story is a remarkable story, like of so many Japanese Canadians of that generation, of resilience and triumph and constant reinvention. And similarly to Empire of the Sun, I use a lot of puppetry and miniatures. And the reason why I bring that up is because for so many audiences in Vancouver, seeing the story of Mas Yamamoto and his life throughout the 20th century, at one point, he helped fight the Cold War by working on the distant early warning line up in the Arctic. So in the space of a decade, he went from being public enemy number one, as a Japanese Canadian living in Vancouver, to being a trusted ally in the fight against a new enemy, communism. So it's a fascinating love story that takes place over most of the 20th century. And the reason why I talk a little bit about its form is not only is this a story that so many Canadians have no idea about, the most common comment I got from so many well-meaning theater goers is, Tetsuro, how come I don't know anything about this chapter of Canadian history? And that is the question that so many of us have asked. And of course, Art Mickey, we're so honored to have him, who is able to rectify that situation, not only for our community, but to set an example of human rights worldwide. The nice thing about this show, and I hope you'll forgive me if I characterize this way in a way that it all seems immodest, but 1 hour photo, what I keep hearing from Gaigokuchin, sort of the non-Japanese audiences, is that it doesn't feel like a history lesson because our use of miniatures. At one point, working in concert with the Nikkei National Museum, they lent us models of the Lemon Creek internment camp, and we had this whole treasure chest of archival materials, not just photographs, but at one point they actually lent me a newly discovered, it was in someone's attic, a Super 8 film of footage that was shot in Lemon Creek. And to my knowledge, this was the first time that unauthorized footage of the internment had ever been screened publicly, because as many of you know, the Canadian government seized personal cameras. Even children's toy cameras were taken away. But one Japanese Nikkei, whose name is lost to history, he had the audacity, he was a real rebel, he smuggled in an 8mm movie camera, and he shot scenes of internment camp life. And of course, you know, there was sports day, and there was dances, and there was a christening, and there's wedding. And so we see this remarkable insight into what life was like. And I think, in a sense, that is in fact the story of 1 Hour Photo, that despite these terrible human rights violations, amidst the ashes of such a tragic experience, you know, teenage love, adolescent hormones, you know, still blooms. It's still, you know, love cannot be repressed, and it's the beginning of a love story that just goes on and on. And it's really quite a remarkable story. And it's been my honor to be able to share just one story of so many Japanese Canadians who have been able to reinvent their lives after experiencing so much hardship. So I know Art is going to be kind enough to leave some details about that upcoming show. But just to let you know, Empire of the Sun will be playing. I'll be doing a Zoom version of this show. So if any of you haven't had the chance to see this show or would like to catch 1 Hour Photo, I would invite you to visit, this is my one little plug, shigi.com. This is my website. And if you're at all interested in keeping in touch, after Vancouver, my biggest segment of people I keep in touch with is in fact Winnipeg. Please go to shigi.com, rhymes with piggy. That's my mnemonic device. I'm born in the year of the boar, and I'm being boorish right now, so I'll wind it up. Yeah, and sign up for my newsletter. Would love to keep in touch. And so at this point, yeah, I would love to open it up to questions and or comments. Yeah, the 1 hour photo adaptation that we're screening at Pacific at PTE Prairie Theatre Exchange is kind of neat, because in the show I use a GoPro, and the GoPro is something that I am able to push through the various miniature models. So the audience has the experience of moving through the cabins at Lemon Creek, or visiting the actual home where I discover all these memories. And so I think with the poetic use of technology, we've been able to make a historic event feel very fresh and new and something exciting for audiences. So I do hope you'll check it out. But yes, again, we've been talking too long. I'll throw it open. Oh, Art, I think you are muted, sir.
So, hi, we do have a question here.
Oh, terrific.
How has your work been affected with COVID?
Oh, that's a terrific question. As a theater artist, I think there are few industries that have been more decimated by the pandemic. One of the ways that I've been able to think about theater is I sat on a jury recently for the Canada Council, and someone wrote something remarkable, and I think it's worth sharing. They said that so many people are asking, when will things go back to normal? When can we go back to the theater? When will things return back to the way they used to be? I think that's the wrong question. The better question to ask is, how can we move forward right now? And one of the ways that some artists are moving forward is by doing something similar to this, in terms of having a kind of Zoom theater online. And in fact, my next iteration of Empire will be a reimagining of the show, but within this space. Now, what I aim to do is to limit the number of audience participants to 49, because I think that's the maximum number of squares you can see at any one time. And rather than pre-record a performance, I want to be able to perform this show live and to bring as much theatricality and inventiveness to bear. So whereas in the theater show, I have a moving camera and then I place these little miniatures in front of them, but I realized with my webcam, I could actually do the same kind of finger puppetry right here. And then I plan to be in a space whereby I can give the audience or anyone who's watching a kind of depth perception. So some of the monologues might be presented very close to the camera, but as the story sees fit, I might actually wander down the hallway until I become very small. But I plan to use a wireless mic, so the audio will always be very intimate. So I'm looking for opportunities about the affordances of online connection and at the same time working within those limitations. So I'm really excited as an artist to be able to adapt some of my existing work, but also coming up with some new work to take advantage of, yeah, this very unusual time we're in. But it's a great question. Thank you.
We have another question from Cheryl and Jeff. How does working with miniatures and puppetry inform your writing process?
Oh, that's a great question, Cheryl. I take it you must be artists yourselves, am I right? Yeah, that sounds like an artist-driven question. The best advice I got from my dramaturgy, my dramaturg, that's kind of like a word for a script doctor, is don't write the script and then expect to put on all the video and all the cameras and the toys and the miniatures afterwards. She said that every aspect, whether you're doing the kind of finger puppets, because I play one scene between me and my father, and we're both on these sort of miniature skateboards, and we have an argument, but you can only see our legs, so to speak, as I'm using the skateboard. She said, the use of a camera, even without dialogue, is just as much a form of writing as anything you do on your keyboard. And so, very early on, when we decided our vocabulary will consist of a GoPro, miniature toys, and finger puppetry, we decided we needed to integrate that right from the beginning in the first drafts. Just because we needed to not have a hierarchy of expression whereby the spoken word is up here and then maybe, shadow puppetry is down here. So we just made sure that we decided what the vocabulary was early on and that we treated every mode of expression with an equal degree of importance. And maybe the nicest thing I've heard about the show is that it doesn't feel like a one-person show, in that monologues, as you know, can be a little bit monotonous. But I told my team of designers, anytime we have a chance to allow the audience to not look at me, let's do that, because it'll allow them to reset their palate. I know it's amazing that you could ever get tired of, this facial hair, right? But I said, and so by resetting constantly, by going to a Super 8 film, by going through a live miniatures, by going to photographs, I felt like the audience was able to reposition themselves in relation to the story. And I think the sense that you get is kind of an iridescent experience of the story, or a kind of kaleidoscopic experience. At least that's was our intention.
Mm-hmm. Another question from Christine. Did any of your experiences of your parents during the war inform 1 Hour Photo?
Oh, yes, definitely. It's interesting. In my first iteration of 1 Hour Photo, there's a slightly different version that was cinematically adapted. There were two very parallel stories between Mas Yamamoto, who's kind of my spiritual father in a sense. I felt an easier kinship with him because English was both our first language, versus my father's experience, which was post internment. I actually touch upon my father's experience more explicitly in Empire of the Sun. He was on a train and visited Ground Zero 2 weeks after the atom bomb was detonated. And so it was in the course of interviewing my father that I first learned of his memories of seeing, or rather just experiencing, Hiroshima in the middle of the night with complete darkness. And this, that memory informed Empire of the Sun, and also I think in a way gave shape to 1 Hour Photo, in that when I was speaking with Julie Tomiko Manning, who is the playwright performer behind another remarkable show that I've seen recently called Tashme, she said when she was interviewing elders about their internment experience, some of them would say, you know, I'm ready to talk, but you have to ask me questions because I don't have any stories. And it reminded me that as much as scholars like to point out that storytelling is this universal activity, it is and it isn't, because as everyone in this room knows, there is such a Japanese, I think our culture valorizes gaman, or suffering in silence to such a large degree that there's been a recent spat of internment stories in the theater, and to me what's interesting is that so many of us who are the playwrights behind these stories, we don't come from families that inherited the legacy of internment. Rather, we are members of the community, and we experience such umbrage and outrage that almost on behalf of the community, we want to tell these stories rather than experiencing the first-hand silencing effect of parents or grandparents who forbid their children or grandchildren from ever speaking about that which happened, which must never be referred to it again. So certainly that legacy of silence and secrets and breaking of that silence definitely informs all my work, because it's very much based on interviewing members of the community and sharing our stories.
I have another question. I guess this is from Kelly. Has the recent increase in Asian discrimination affected you in any way? And have you given any thought of incorporating this into any of your future works?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Kelly, I was thinking that very question just today. My mom is 85 and she's very sprightly. And one of the ways she's been able to keep so healthy after the passing of my father is by walking 5 kilometers a day in the local park. Since COVID began, she doesn't do that. And part of me, we live in a safe neighborhood in Vancouver, Cambie Village, and part of me wants her to get that vitamin D. But another part of me would never forgive myself if something happened to my mother, because as we know, this anti-Asian violence is directed primarily at Asian women. Our elders in particular are targeted. And so I'm wrestling with this at this very moment. My next piece, which again will be another autobiographical piece, I want to be exploring the intersection of my Japanese identity as it coincides with gender issues, in particular the constraints of masculinity, the legacy of my grandfather, my father, and my relationship with my son and daughter, and to what degree how Japanese men, we often police ourselves not to be emotional, but the one emotion that is permitted sometimes, with my father in particular, is anger or violence. And so it seems to me that the very qualities that, the code of Bushido, or being a samurai, or of a traditional Japanese men that have been so celebrated throughout Japanese culture, even to this day, are the very things that, in fact, killed my father. My opening line of this next piece is, my father was murdered by the patriarchy. And that's sort of a beginning point. So yeah, definitely the violence that's going on today, and what's happening during these strange times, and how our community is once again being victimized, and not many people caring about it, because racism is so narrowly defined often as simply a black and white issue, literally and figuratively. I think these topics are more important than ever. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that reminder of such an important theme.
I have another question from Meme Pepe. What would you like to leave as a legacy piece for your children, nieces, and nephews?
Oh gosh, when I did Empire of the Sun, my children figure into it in the form of little home videos, and there's one moment in the story where I talk about I contrast the degradation or the humiliation my father felt when I cleaned him after he when he needed it, when I had to change his depends. Versus my son, at that very same time, I joke that whenever my son Taizo is on the toilet, he'd yell out, "I don't want any privacy," which is his way of saying, "I'm lonely." And then when I walk into the bathroom, he'd turn around and look up at me and say, "Daddy, will you wipe my Batinsky?" And I go on and have this little reverie explaining how my son loves this time together of me cleaning him, you know, his butt, his little butt. And because for him, it's like a day at the spa. And I warned my son when he came to see the show. I said, I'm going to say this line and everyone's going to laugh, not at you, with you. And I told him so many times, I thought I'm spoiling the show. But midway through the show, I noticed he had disappeared. Like, he's gone. He was there in the third row. And then I asked the stage manager up, excuse me, I'm sorry, I just need to take a moment. People probably thought this was part of the show. And I said, Taizo? And then I spied his hand just holding the seat down because they're the plush seats that point up. And he began yelling, "He's lying. He's lying. I used to do that. It's not true. It's not true." And I said, Taizo, we talked about this. You know, you're the first Shigematsu man to ever cry. You're the hero of this story. And then the audience is just looking at his little hand holding down the seat. And he said, "Well, if I'm the hero of the story, then how come my face isn't on the poster?" And the audience just, had such a big laugh. And I thought, oh, that's terrible. They're going to think this is part of the show and this is all just a gag, but we're really having a real moment. So my son, for 1 hour photo, said, "You are hereby forbidden." He expressed his wishes through his lawyerly sister, to use my name or likeness without my written permission. So Taizo does not figure in this show. For my next piece, which is more autobiographical, I'm hoping to be able to reintroduce him back into it. But I hope that by seeing these plays and seeing people who look like them on stage, because like this other show, this was the only show that Taizo liked, was called Kuroko, because it's about Hikikimori, a young woman who goes into her bedroom and doesn't emerge for 10 years and spends all her time in virtual reality. He liked that show because it had nothing to do with the Shigematsus. But I hope that I can give my children a glimpse of what we never got growing up, which is seeing people who look like us on stage, on the page, and on screen. And which is why I'm so grateful to someone like Inch Choi, who made Kim's Convenience. I think representation matters, and I think the work that you do with the JCAM and Art Mickey and all the leadership, we keep culture alive and we present, I think, a counter narrative to the Western Eurocentric conception of Canadians as, the blonde, blue-eyed Mountie, carrying the beaver. But Canada is so much more than that, and I think everyone in this room can attest to that. And speaking of wonderful artists, I don't want to take up any more time of the far more talented artists that are part of this evening's lineup, Lillian and Jeff. So I think I will leave it there. And so thank you so much for your attention. And yes, again, very un-Japanese, very un-Canadian, but please sign up, visit my website. Would love to keep in touch. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Tetsuro. That was great.
Thank you so much. Okay. I'm going to go teach my class, so I'll be able to watch the recording of this afterwards. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff. Jesse. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. And what we would like to do is let you know that his show is going to be shown on Prairie Theatre. Prairie Theatre is organizing it. And if anyone's interested, you could buy tickets through the Prairie Theatre office. And it'll be a virtual show. It's on for about 4 or 5 days. And so anyone who's interested, go to Prairie Theatre box office, and the tickets are on sale at the present time. And so I hope you can get a chance to see it. I'd like to now go on to the second part of our program, which is now the presentation from Jeff and Lillian. And the book that they've produced is called On Being Yukiko. And by the way, this book is available at the Cultural Center for $20. I think we have quite a few copies of it. So I hope people have a chance to pick it up. It's great for your kids. So something to look into. Jeff Stearns is an animator, documentary filmmaker, best known for his feature-length documentary, One Big Happy Family, and also another documentary, Mixed Match. Jeff had been in Winnipeg a few times with his works, and I'm glad that you're able to take part in our show. Jeff was born in Kelowna, BC, studied film animation at Emily Carr University of Art and Design, and has founded the Meditating Bunny Studio Incorporated, and this is his first graphic novel. Lillian Michiko Blakey is a Sansei, born in Coaldale, Alberta. Her family was forcibly relocated to a sugar beet farm, similar to our family, Lillian. We came to Manitoba, your family went to Alberta. She's a fine arts graduate from the University of Toronto, was a visual arts teacher and consultant, and her works are found in the Ontario Art Collection, National Nikkei Museum, and recently in the Royal Ontario Museum exhibition on Being Japanese. And this is Lillian's first graphic novel. So I'm going to now turn the program over to both Jeff and Lillian.
Cool. Thanks, Art. Again, very nice introduction. Lillian, how you doing?
Oh, great.
Good so those that don't know, Lillian and I, it's funny because Lillian and I have never met in person. We've only actually get to see each other face to face on these Zoom presentations. So it's always nice to be able to catch up that way. But yeah, thank you, Art. As Art mentioned, I've been to Winnipeg a few times. I was on the endowment fund committee as well. Art brought me to, I did the same with Tetsuro. I did the fundraiser that one time as a keynote. So I've got fond memories of Winnipeg, and sadly I haven't been there in a while because it's the situation. But without further ado, let's move into the presentation portion of the talk that Lillian and I are going to do. The way we've structured it is basically I'm going to present a little bit about my artistic career and some of the work I've done in the past and how it led up to creating On Being Yukiko. And then Lillian will present a bit about her artistic work as well. And then we're going to come together and present on Being Yukiko as a whole and how it all came together and how we decided that we would collaborate on this project. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I need the host, Kelly, are you able to allow me to share my screen? I think I need to disable the, oh, there we go. Thank you very much. And I'm going to move it over to there. Okay. Art and Lillian, are you able to see the title page here? It says On Being, the cover. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Sure. Okay. And if I advance the slide, you see this drawing of me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Great. Okay, we are in business. So yeah, Lily and I, we thought we'd have some fun. So in the book, we actually drew each other, or we drew our own portraits in our own style. And we thought that was fun because the book encompasses two styles of our art making, and both of our art making is very different from each other, but interestingly complements each other, I think, very well. And from what we've heard from others, they seem to agree. So I always kind of go back to the very beginning, growing up in Kelowna, as Art mentioned. I grew up in a very sort of a larger family group where my mother had 4 sisters on my Japanese Canadian side of the family. And every one of them married white guys. So there was a lot of happas in our family. And I'll explain to you a little bit more about that term in a second. But you can see there's my grandpa holding a giant sockeye salmon, I believe, next to someone who looks like my mom, because my mom's a twin, but that's actually my mom's sister. And I'm the little guy in the Wayne Gretzky number 99 t-shirt there. So I always look back at sort of how growing up in a Japanese Canadian sort of household, being around my grandparents a lot because my parents bought the orchard that my grandparents used to run, kind of inspired me a lot growing up. And those sort of experiences came to fruition sort of through different times in my life when I felt these difficult periods of racialization, I guess. And one of these experiences was when it was Multicultural Day, I think in grade 2 or 3, and I had to bring a dish from my cultural background. And it was a predominantly very Caucasian class. For those of you who might have visited Kelowna in the 80s, you might have noticed it wasn't very diverse. And so my mom, I've only ever had fudumaki rolls at that point in my life. So we made some of those and we took them to school the next day. And all the kids and the teacher wouldn't touch it because they thought it was weird and they didn't understand what it was. And some people thought it was raw fish, and even though it was not. But long story short, my mom came to pick me up and I still had a full tray of sushi, which I put in the garbage because I didn't want her to know that nobody wanted to eat her food. So back in the 80s, there weren't sushi restaurants in every corner like there is now. So it was kind of a rarity back then. But those experiences started to really dig deep in my own psyche. And as I grew up to create art and films, a lot of these experiences played a huge part in my development and creation. So over the past 20 years, I've made 9 films. Most short animations, and some are feature-length documentaries with a mix of animation. Some of you might have seen What Are You Anyways, which looked at my experiences growing up in Kelowna being mixed Japanese, One Big Hapa Family, which I'll talk about in a bit, and Mixed Match, as well as some of the other animations. If anyone's interested, you can usually Google any of these and watch them online. Luckily, I've had success with it, which has sort of propelled me into sort of being able to do this as a career, which is good. So I've been nominated for Emmys and won some big festival awards, and that has led me to a lot of opportunities. But it all began when I went to Emily Carr to get basically a degree in animation. And I thought I'd be an animator for Disney, realizing I don't draw like Disney, so I needed to figure out something else, which sort of led me to creating films in my own style. These were the first couple films that I created back when I was in school, and that led me to creating a certain style. And that style I coined as Hapanimation. So it was the idea that I grew up watching a lot of Japanese animation. I grew up watching a lot of North American cartoons. And subconsciously, I think seeping into my psyche as I was drawing, the two styles were kind of blending in my own brain, much as I am a blend of Japanese and European descent, because my father is of European descent. So hapa, if you don't know, was sort of it's a word coined from the Hawaiian word hapa. And that word was brought over to North America and was starting to be used for people who identify as mixed Asian. And a lot of the Japanese Canadians, Japanese Americans had sort of gravitated toward using the word because there wasn't really something that we were using to describe ourselves. And this became pretty popular in the 90s and 2000s, since sort of falling out of favor a bit. But I coined my style as Hapanimation as sort of a fun way of saying I'm blending these two styles together. This became very apparent in my first professional film called What Are You Anyways? For those who haven't seen it, you can just YouTube it, What Are You Anyways? But this film actually led me to meeting art and meeting a lot of people in the Japanese Canadian community, because it was the first time anyone had ever made a film, especially an animated film, looking at mixed Asian identity and mixed identity in general. And this is 2005, sorry. So it's not really that far away, when you think about when we started to first really talk about mixed race identity. And this film really is just an autobiographical story of all those interesting stories that I had growing up being mixed, and sort of is presented in chapter format of me going through my life trying to figure out my own identity, being Nikkei, being mixed, being Hapa, being Japanese Canadian, which then led me to sort of thinking, okay, I want to look at the bigger dynamic of my own Japanese Canadian family and how we self-identified. And so, like I said, all of my mom's sisters and herself married white guys. And so my family was very blended, very mixed. But also, all of my Japanese Canadian family after my grandparents' generation intermarried, meaning that there was nobody after my grandparents' generation, and I mean my mother's generation, Sansei generation, that was quote unquote pure Japanese anymore. We were all mixed to some degree. So that led me to wanting to make a documentary to look at that. And it was called One Big Hapa Family. And this was the first time where I looked at 4 generations of my own Japanese Canadian family, and essentially wanted to explore how and why did everybody, start to, I guess, mix and blend. but also how it reflected the national average, which I had seen on the National Association of Japanese Canadians website as being 95% rate of intermarriage, and which is very high for any community. And a lot of that has to do with, of course, the Japanese Canadian internment, but also my family wasn't interned because we were living outside that 100-mile area in the interior of British Columbia already. And so there were still other factors that were there. So all things that I explored within my family. As you can see, there's some screenshots. I went to New Denver and visited the Memorial Center there. Also, I interviewed my parents for the first time. I talked to my cousins. I talked to my grandmother on my dad's side of the family. And it was pretty eye-opening, some of those experiences that my family experienced, quote unquote, being in an interracial marriage, but also sort of, again, some of that historical sort of background within our family and how we self-identified, which I felt was very interesting. Of course, as an animator, I wanted to put a lot of animation into the film. So I enlisted a lot of animators to help me with that. And as you can see, we had a very eclectic style of animation to help bring these stories to life. And we had great success with the film. 2010 was when the film released, and we toured it all over the world. We had sold out screenings all over the place. Again, I got to come to Winnipeg, do screenings there, traveled all over and presented the film. So what was great is that we were telling our story. And again, one of the first times this was really ever discussed in this format. That led me to doing a lot of university workshops. So I was invited to Harvard and Yale, and I was doing a lot of speaking at universities, which was great because, again, this generation are the ones that we want to teach about our history and get interested in about identity. So there's a lot of mixed organizations that were inviting me to campuses to speak, which led me to being able to be a public speaker as well as a filmmaker. This then led me to my last feature-length documentary called Mixed Match, which I think is one of my most important films to date because it looks at why it's why it's difficult for mixed race people to find bone marrow donors if you have leukemia or a rare blood disease. And this is something that's not very many people know about, but if someone has leukemia and they're mixed Japanese, chances are they'll have to find another mixed Japanese person to be a match because it's all about finding someone who's a genetic twin. And so, it's something that we needed to raise awareness for, and we did. We got the word out. We got a lot of media attention. We were doing bone marrow drives after every screening, and we found out that actually quite a few people who signed up at our bone marrow drives at our screenings got called to donate bone marrow and save lives. So we've always felt the film took 6 years to make, finished in 2016. And we always said if we could save one life with this film, everything would be worth it. And we have since learned that has happened. So we're very, very fortunate. Again, these films, you can get DVDs off my site if you want. But this led me to be getting a lot more recognition, not just through film, but also through these organizations I was trying to work with. So Be the Match and Canadian Blood Services. I've been very fortunate that I've had diversity awards being presented to me as well for my work, which I think is awesome because I've always believed that it's important because I have a very multicultural family, a very diverse and blended family, that I should be, like Tetsuro was saying, representing, you know, the people and the faces we want to see on film that reflect the mosaic of Canada. And that is one that is very diverse. So as you can see, my wife is actually mixed Japanese, like myself. I'm actually the first person in my family after my grandparents' generation to marry someone who's also Japanese Canadian. And we have little Hapa kids. So we joke and call them Super Hapas or Hapa 2.0. My son, Takashi, and my daughter, Yuki, are pictured there. They're a little older now, but I like this picture because they look pretty cute in there. This led me to wanting to then sort of stray from film a bit and write children's books because I wanted my kids to see themselves reflected as well in the books that we were reading to each other. So I made a book called Mixed Critters to show Yuki that animals could be many things like she was and not just one thing. And so as you can see here, I like to draw on Post-it notes. So I drew a lot of these animals on Post-it notes that lended themselves into actually creating an ABC alphabet book. And so in this alphabet book, you can see we've got like U is for unicorn and T is for turducken, snakels. You can see there's my daughter holding up the book. But great, it got into chapters. We got distribution for it. And so the film actually, or I mean, not the film, but the book itself actually went out into the world and was sort of, again, an early introduction to mixedness for children, which I think was really awesome. This led me, oh, here's some of the images. There's a Narus, mix of narwhal and moose. And Rhinocericoon, it was my wife's idea, this one. Snakel, I was getting requests from people. But the biggest I guess the biggest thing for any artist is that we were inspiring kids, right? The biggest reward for anything we do. And so I was getting drawings sent to me from other kids, or from kids, I only call myself a kid, but of their own interpretations of mixed critters. And so I think this was pretty fun. These are actually Greg Masuda's kids. I don't know if Greg did a lot of great documentaries. Nori and His Delicious Dreams was a follow-up, my next kids book. It came out last year. And it was really a reflection of me as a kid dreaming about sleeping in different foods. Not technically me, but things I used to think about when I was a kid because I love to eat and I like to sleep. So I combined the two together and it became this book. In the book, Nori is actually a little Japanese boy, mixed Japanese like myself. He has a Japanese mother, a Caucasian father. And yeah, I just wanted to see that other kids could see their families represented in books like this. It's not so much about them being mixed as much as it's just, hey, he's a mixed kid with a mixed family. That's cool. He's got an obachan. We could kind of touch on it in the book a little bit. But for the most part, it's really just about him sleeping in food. So here's some early drawings. As you can see, here's the final pictures, the illustrations. Again, I wanted to represent some Japanese, culture. So I got, he's sleeping in sushi. He was sleeping in some shumai, of course, ramen, because that is one of my favorites as well. So really what it boils down to is I feel like I have found my bliss, being able to work in this medium, being creative, being able to tell these stories visually that represent, like I said, the cultural mosaic that surrounds us, but also to represent the Japanese Canadian community in this way, as well as someone who is mixed Japanese. I think it's important that I'm able to tell my story too. But without further ado, I want to introduce my partner in crime, Lillian Michiko Blakey, who without Lillian, On Being Yukiko would never have actually ever been a thought. So on to you, Lillian. Thanks.
Okay. Next. Okay. The history of my family in Canada is almost as long as the history of Canada itself. In this family photo, we see my paternal grandparents, Kirohichi and Takako Yano, with their 3 sons. They were both born in Kumamoto, Japan. My father, Hisashi, was born in 1910 in Port Moody, British Columbia. He is the baby in his mother's arms. Both of his parents were dead by the time he was 7. Next. My maternal grandfather, Nitaro Hamaguchi, immigrated to British Columbia in 1900 when he was only 20 years old. He became a Canadian citizen in 1907. In 1913, Maki Teramoto became his picture bride. They both came from Kumamoto, Japan. They had 3 daughters, Eunice Kinue, Lily Reiko, and Rosie Akiya. Next. When war broke out against Japan in December 1941, my family lost everything and were forced to relocate to Lethbridge, Alberta, to unimaginable hardship working in sugar beet fields. Here's my mom. Next. My mom had been engaged to Roy Hisashi Yano before they left to go to Alberta. My father had been sent to work in a road camp at Griffin Lake. In 1944, he finally received permission to go to Alberta to marry my mom. Next. All Japanese Canadian adults were fingerprinted, like criminals, and had to carry identification cards at all times. Mom's name was spelled incorrectly, but she was too afraid to correct them. She was only 19. Next. I was born in Coaldale, Alberta in 1945. Here, I am with my grandparents before my grandmother before she relocated to Japan in 1946, just after the photo was taken. Next. My parents never talked about what happened during the war. They wanted my sister and me to grow up as Canadians without the shame of our family's past. I just knew something bad had happened. So I grew up denying that the Japanese part of me, like many other sansei. But everything that we experience growing up does have an effect on how we go out into the unknown world. And all of the people before us are part of us as well. I am Canadian. I am Japanese. In many ways, I am the same as a person of mixed race. Each part of me was at war with the other. It was not until the acknowledgement and redress was signed on September 22nd, 1988, by then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and Art Miki that I began to understand who I am. Next. In my professional art career, I sporadically searched for my identity. In 1975, a piece from my first solo exhibition, Mirror, is a portrait of my two selves. At the time, I wrote a preface which explored my dilemma of being two people in one. Mirror is an introspective piece which attempts to express my ambiguous feelings resulting from belonging to two very different cultures. It is a highly symbolic work. The two women are really one, as if one of them is looking at a mirror image of herself. Both are Asian. One is in Western dress and the other is in a Japanese kimono. But who is the real person and who is the image in the mirror? Next. For most of my professional art career, I created images in my mind, often using family as figures. The Japanese Canadian members appear in scenes of Canadian life, but make no connections to my family's past. This painting, in silent spaces between the notes, I stand outside myself and watch, alludes, perhaps, to my feelings of being an outsider, as a Canadian, but not fully a Canadian. The model is one of my biracial twin daughters. Next. I painted Shikataganai, It Can't Be Helped, Alberta, 1951, in 2001, 13 years after redress. It was my very first expression of my family's story. It is my own memory of the sugar beet fields of Alberta, where my family toiled endlessly from dawn until dusk. I see myself hiding behind my Anglo doll. My clean white dress contrasts sharply with this life of toil. It is a reminder of the city life my parents were forced to leave. Next. 37 years after World War II and 24 years after redress had passed before I had the courage to have a solo exhibition about my family story at the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center in Toronto. Hanging prominently in the foreground is a large self-portrait of myself as a young woman, wannabe. It is an ink drawing on Japanese paper. I am hiding behind an image of Marilyn Monroe, whose famous face is ironically on a Japanese fan. More than anything, I wanted to be blonde and white. I was very nervous about showing art which focused on the injustice against Japanese Canadians living in British Columbia during the war. Next. Gaijin Foreigner, Strangers in Our Own Land, is an interactive installation of 48 images, accompanied by excerpts from written accounts by my mother and her sister of the forced removal. Next. Viewers could lift the images to read the words under each of them. It touched my heart when many elders came to me after they had read the words under each of the 48 images and said, with tears in their eyes, "Thank you. That's exactly what happened to my family." Next. Here, my mom's family posed in front of the Alberta cabin in which all 9 of them lived. My mom wrote in her memoirs, "When Japan joined Germany against us, the Canadian government forcibly uprooted the Japanese Canadians from the West Coast. We were given the choice of having women and children go to internment camps and men to road camps, or to stay together as families and go to sugar beet farms in the prairies. Mother wanted our family to be together, so we decided to be evacuated to Alberta." Next. In this work, From Enemy Alien to All You Can Eat Sushi, I am challenging the viewer to look at the experience through my eyes. Here, I look at myself as a child standing behind a barbed wire fence. Even children of Canadian-born parents of Japanese heritage were considered enemy aliens. Behind me is the order issued by the Canadian government to move us inland, away from the coast. The irony is that now sushi, along with Japanese cars, is enormously popular. There are sushi restaurants at every corner and in every grocery store, offering to the Canadian public all the sushi they can eat. I had never thought that I would see this dichotomy in my lifetime. Next. There were a ton of Hollywood movies about World War II in the 1950s. Here, I feel targeted. I want to shout to the world. I am not a Jap. I am not a geisha. I am not a yellow peril. I am not an enemy alien. I am a Canadian. Next. In 2019, the Royal Ontario Museum, North America's largest museum, presented a 6-month exhibition. The Japanese-Canadian story was finally an important part of the history of Canada. Here is what the ROM stated in its press release. The Royal Ontario Museum is pleased to present the contemporary art installation, Being Japanese-Canadian, Reflections on a Broken World. Featuring works by 8 Japanese-Canadian artists from across the country, Being Japanese-Canadian explores multi-generational responses to the exile, dispossession, and internment of Canadian citizens of Japanese descent during the 1940s. Designed as a series of artworks interspersed throughout the ROM Sigmund Samuel Gallery of Canada, Being Japanese-Canadian reflects on a period of Canadian history that is explored through the deeply personal narratives of 8 contemporary artists grappling with the effects of the internment era. This compelling artistic examination of our shared national history furthers the discussion of multiculturalism and belonging in today's society. This installation is a collaboration between curators from the ROM and the Japanese-Canadian community. I was one of the 8 artists. Next. The opening reception of the ROM exhibition was attended by an audience of more than 400. Here, Bryce Kambara is giving the opening address. Bryce was a member of the team led by Art Miki to seek redress for us. Most recently, Bryce is the 2021 recipient of the Governor General's Award for Outstanding Community Service in Visual Arts. Next. Reiko, Alberta, 1945, is a portrait I painted of my mother after her death in 2008. She is wearing a city woman's blouse, looking at the viewer with a steady but not condemning gaze. In front of her is the barbed wire fence around the sugar beet field where she worked from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day for months until the beets were harvested. The blue sky represents hope. This painting was chosen to be the signature image for the ROM exhibition. Next. 2 other works were in the ROM exhibit. Taking the Nancy, British Columbia, 1942, depicts the RCMP confiscating my grandfather's boat. I include myself in the work, looking back at the scene. In Barry Broadfoot's book, Years of Sorrow, Years of Shame, my Aunt Eunice recounts. My father had just repainted his boat and had the engine rehauled. My daughter was only a year old at the time, so he renamed his boat Nancy after her. And he was so happy. Then the government just took it and he never got anything for it. I don't know what happened. Next. My third piece was Canadian Born, Alberta, 1942, which shows my mom in the sugar beet field with her fingerprinted identification card behind her. Next. In 2020, all of my works are large installations on shoji paper. In Mixed Blessings, I am tied to my children and grandchildren, who are the best part of me. They are also the end of my Japanese heritage, both genetically and culturally. I did not pass on the little that I know about my people. I am, therefore, the end of my Japanese line. But I celebrate the fact that they are a new kind of people, children of the world. My grandchildren carry the DNA of ancestors from far corners of the world: Japanese, English, Irish, French, Scottish, Dutch, German, Jamaican, Egyptian, and African. Perhaps when the whole world is filled with children of the world, it will truly be a world of mixed blessings. This work suggests the ever-changing journey of my family from Japanese Canadian to a global family. Perhaps it will be a better world when everyone is mixed race. As human beings, we are all related, and future generations of my family in Canada will be citizens of the world. Next. In 1995, I asked my mother to write her story for her grandchildren. I'm so happy that she did, or I would not be able to do the work that I'm doing today. Next. In 2019, I wrote and illustrated my grandmother Maki's story, The Picture Bride, which I sent to Jeff Chiba Stearns to see if an animated version could be created. Later, we decided that a graphic novel which incorporated the past, present, and future will be the most exciting form for young people. On Being Yukiko was a result of our collaboration in 2020. Maybe now, after this very long creative journey, I'm able to see how much my dual identities as both Canadian and Japanese are equally who I am. I now know that the issue of identity is constantly changing, and that knowing about the past informs who I am as a human being. And that is why On Being Yukiko is such an important book for both Jeff and myself, because we want it to be a story that can be read by children of the future generations, even if they no longer look Japanese. Now I'll turn it back to Jeff so he could talk more about the book.
All right, thanks, Lillian. Yeah, so Lillian mentioned she originally reached out to me because she had seen some of my films, and she was looking to adapt the book, which I have right here, The Picture Bride, into an animated film. Now, as some of you might know, animation is a lot of work, as you have to bring images to life, and usually through many drawings. So we were trying to find funding to do it, and it was not proving to be very fruitful in terms of trying to get some people backing us. So it was sort of just around that time when the pandemic was starting, when we decided, okay, let's just revisit this a bit. And Lillian had kind of mentioned a graphic novel, and I've always wanted to do, I grew up reading comic books. I love comic books. And I thought, hey, you know what? This might be a great time because, we're going into lockdown and I have all this time to be home and just be with my family, that I could start a new project. And I thought, okay, hey, this is great. Let's visit this as a thought, basically a story. Now, I think Lillian was really keen on wanting to make sure it was something we could collaborate on because of the work that I've done on multiracial identity, the work she's done on her family history. And so I thought it'd be a great sort of way to combine our skills to create this story. And Lillian really wanted to kind of bring it into the present because she's got grandchildren that she likes to, talk about identity with. I have kids now too, and I've done a lot of speaking about identity. So it kind of brought us into adapting The Picture Bride and bringing it into a contemporary kind of current time frame, as well as looking at the past. So how we did that was, again, as Lillian mentioned, we looked at her grandmother's story as a picture bride, which was written by her mother, Lillian, or your mom. And that became kind of the setting for how we approached the story. Knowing that it was going to be a combination of two of our different styles, it sort of became important that I was going to tackle the present day story. And so we had to come up with two characters. One was the grandmother speaking to her granddaughter. And almost very much modeled after Lillian, obviously, because it is her family story and, what her possibly a granddaughter that she might have. well, she does have granddaughters, but anyways, I was doing some early concept sketches, some rough sketches of kind of how this could look, kind of looking at, I was getting that feel down, and we kind of settled on this style with a hapanimation look that I had sort of developed with my animation that translated pretty well to a comic book form. And so for me, it was kind of neat to sort of, these are the splash pages in the book that I had done, but we had to start from somewhere. So Lillian kind of gave me a rough script, and it was kind of based on her book, as well as kind of combining some dialogue that she might think she'd have with her granddaughter. And I kind of took that and sort of adapted it into sort of pages. But the way I worked, because essentially I had all of these beautiful illustrations that Lillian had created for the Picture Bride, her children's book, I knew that I would be incorporating those into this graphic novel in some way. And so I just started from page 1 and then worked all the way up until we were done. So technically, I didn't even really know how the book was going to end when I started the book, which is not any way I'd ever recommend anyone start a project. But for me, it was actually kind of a fun way of just exercising the stream of consciousness, which I love doing in my own work. And as you can see, we sort of started out to sort of, let's get the titling down. So everything was very hand drawn. My wife actually did this titling. And we started on just Emma. Emma is the basically Gosei. She's 5th generation Japanese Canadian. She is quote unquote a quarter Japanese now because her mother is Hapa like myself. And we wanted to make sure that we were speaking to this generation, or, I'm the Yonsei generation, Lillian's the Sansei generation, but we know that we're coming into the Gosei generation, like my children. And so we wanted to really create a project that could speak to them, as well as speak to our generation, and bridging that gap in this intergenerational way. So to do that, these are some of the sort of rough pages. I would rough it out. Most of it was all done digitally. So I drew all this mainly in the computer, and it made it easy to kind of color. So you can see we did use a very flat palette tone. And then I just sort of added in text. A lot of times we were adjusting and editing text all the way up until we were printing. So a lot of this would change and the boxes would get bigger. But it was a great kind of way just to start the creative process. So as I mentioned, Lillian provided me with the Picture Bride book, and she had all these amazing renditions of her family history and her story already done. I think there was almost 50 to 60 illustrations she had done, all in this sort of square format, which actually worked out well because as I was laying the book out, they worked very well in terms of being able to incorporate panels into the book. So as you can see, my artwork sort of we start in the present, where you can see it's very animated, and then we kind of go into the past and use Lillian's artwork. And I think what's great is that kids can pick up right away that it's two different styles, right? So we're going into the past, it's Lillian's work. As the present happens, it's my work, which actually worked as a really great vehicle to tell the story and jump around from the past to the present. As you can see, here's some of those illustrations that Lillian had done that I was able to incorporate into the book. Here's some more pages. So as you can see, some of the pages really are half Lillian's work, half my work. So it really is a 50-50 collaboration when it comes down to the whole book as a whole. And as you can see here, we go right back to when her grandmother came over to Canada and from Kumamoto, Japan in 1912. And what she faced when she arrived as well. And so we delve into that story of the Picture Bride, which isn't something that's talked a lot about. We'd like to focus a lot on Japanese Canadian, that history during World War II, but we take it all the way back to the turn of the century, which I think is really important for our Japanese Canadian history, because that's when my grandparents came over as well, around 1907. And so, being 4th generation Japanese Canadian, we have a very long-standing history going back to that turn of the century. So you can see here more of those illustrations. Sometimes I could use Lillian's illustrations for a whole page, which I think is nice because a lot of it, when we go to the boxes, are Lillian telling the story to her granddaughter. And so we actually did a reading of this a little while back for the Japanese language school here in Vancouver. And I think we had 300 kids from Japan, preschool kids, listen in. And for Lillian and I, that was quite the experience being able to read the whole story out loud. But as you can see, it goes through a myriad of their history, working in a cannery. Her mother became the May Queen back sort of around 1932, which was the first time a Japanese Canadian had ever been awarded that honor of being the May Queen. And so, as you can see here, it was just sort of a nice way that the grandmother is telling the story to Emma, her granddaughter. But we wanted to make sure that we were talking about issues that affected kids who are mixed, especially. And I know that I've had a lot of dialogue with my friends about it, and I do a lot of speaking about it. So we wanted to make sure that Emma had a group of friends who were also identifying as being mixed, but in their own way. So even though her friend Annika might sort of pass as being white, she sees herself as being a third culture kid because both her parents are from different European countries, and now they're living in Canada. So she has three cultures to sort of form her identity with. And so we call that third culture kids. Her other friend, Nathan, is mixed Nigerian and white. And so he is also struggling with trying to figure out his own identity. And Emma is starting to learn that she is more and more identifying as being Japanese, mixed Japanese Canadian. And so they have this dialogue talking about this. And we thought that was very important to introduce into this graphic novel as a way that kids can talk to themselves about this stuff, because I could never talk to my parents about being mixed because my parents aren't mixed. They were quote unquote monoracial. And so I never ever spoke to my parents about my own identity, because technically to me, they could never, I guess, it was very difficult, I guess, and challenging, because I never felt like I could speak to them about it because they didn't experience what I had experienced. Taking it into sort of over the history in the course of this, we go into the Japanese Canadian internment, and really with Lillian's family story, it really is all encompassing, right? We look at all those aspects of, coming to Canada, dealing with, having a fishing boat taken away, going to have to decide whether or not they were going to go to, when they were in Hastings Park, whether they were going to go to pick sugar beets or be interned in the interior British Columbia. And as you can see, they did choose to go pick sugar beets because they wanted to keep the family together. And so as you can see, when Lillian was showing us her ID cards, we wanted to bring that history into the book as well too. So we actually got those scans from the National Nikkei Museum, and we were able to put them into the book as well. So you can see, they faced a lot of hardship when they arrived on the farms, and not being well equipped as city folk to work on the farms, and dealing with extreme weather, cold, extreme physical labor as well. And really Emma's experiencing all this through the telling of the story by her grandmother, Lillian. And even all the way up until, the atomic bomb. And what I liked about this painting is that it was done by Lillian's husband. And Lillian can tell you a little bit more about that. But I didn't know that actually when I put the image in the book, and when she told me that, it brings a little more kind of context, I think, to the artwork itself. And what was interesting as well too is learning that Lillian's family, they went to Japan after the war. So they were some of the 4,000 Japanese Canadians who were Canadian citizens that were exiled to Japan, and even some of her, Lillian's aunts were also went back, and they had never been to Japan before. So there was extreme hardship that they faced going back. Luckily, in the story and in real life, Lillian's family did not decide to go with their bachan, and so they stayed. Now we have redress, and hey, look at that handsome fellow there. Do you recognize him? Few years back, I guess, but this is an image that Lillian illustrated from the redress. And some of the early critiques that we got were that a lot of people wanted to have more of a Japanese Canadian presence and really honor that history that we had from the redress. So Lillian actually went back and revisited this image and put in a few more of the key players in the internment or in the redress, as you can see there. And we wanted to make sure that that was important, that we showcased, a lot of those Japanese Canadians that brought, the redress to our community. And as you can see here, here's the full page and how it appears in the book. And so, like I said, it really is an all-encompassing story in the sense that we really cover a good century of history and bring it right into the contemporary present with the story of being mixed. As you can see here, I've incorporated a lot of my own art as well too. A lot of Japanese Canadian imagery with the koi. We end up in, this park is actually Korea Park, which is in Ontario. Placing it in during the cherry blossom time because it's a very pretty time. But as you can see here, that dialogue brings Yukiko and her obachan very close together, her bachan. And Yukiko then really, Emma, decides that she wants to go by her Japanese Canadian name or Japanese name Yukiko. And that was an important name, I think, for Lillian and I, because it was amalgamation of sort of her granddaughter's name and my daughter's name. And we wanted to kind of, honor the fact that we are present in the next generation's lives. And so as you can see here at the end of the book, sorry to give it away, she says to her friends, instead of Emma, do you think you could call me Yukiko from now on? And as Lillian brought to light, this isn't the end, it's the beginning. And I think for Yukiko, it's very important for her that now she has discovered her new sense of identity, that she wants to propel herself and learn more about the history. And as you can see here in the page on the left, they're talking a lot about, the atrocities and what happened during not just World War II and the Japanese Canadians, but a lot about Indian residential schools, about Canadian head tax, or the Chinese Canadian head tax, because we also felt it was important to bring up that there are other histories that are very much important and for them to learn as well. So it was just a little bit of for students, it's a way in. And we wanted to give them a way in so they could go and learn more about their own family histories through Emma's story. At the end of the book, it was a lot of work, but we put together a glossary of terms that are featured in the book. And we wanted to make sure that kids knew, what is racial profiling? What's a proxy marriage? What's colonialism? What's gaman? What's a Pritchard bride? What are POW camps? Because these are all things that are very important in the history, but we didn't have time to expand on it, obviously, in the graphic novel. So we were very lucky that we had a lot of consultants on this project, people from the Landscapes of Injustice, Michael Abe, Jordan Stranger Ross, a lot of the staff from the National Nikkei Museum helped us as well. We had a lot of people reading the book early on to give us feedback. And that was very important to us because it helped us make the most accurate book that we could for this time on the history of Japanese Canadians. Reviews, we were very lucky. Art, he was instrumental in giving us an early review, as well as Joy Kogawa. But what was very interesting for us is that we wanted to make sure it wasn't just Art and Joy giving us quotes for the book, it was their grandkids. And so Alex Miki, the granddaughter of Art, gave us a nice, lovely quote too. And the grandchild of Joy Kogawa gave us a lovely quote as well too. Speaking of which, Anne has actually put together a great speaker series. I think Lily and I will be speaking on it on April the 2nd. So if you're part of the Japanese Canadian Facebook group, I'll put more information about that there. That's a great place to learn more about and communicate with people in the community. So, and Mary Kitagawa, Tamo Campos, who's the grandson of David Suzuki, gave us a quote too. And so we were very lucky that people came on very early to support the project, as well as the National Association of Japanese Canadians. If you've read the book, you like the book, please help us out because we're independently published. I published it through my studio. So we want to make sure the book gets out there into the world by putting, if you go to Goodreads, bit.ly/Yukiko Goodreads, I can put that in here, bit.ly/Yukiko Reads, Goodreads. Leave a review because it helps us out greatly to get librarians and other people behind the book. So we really encourage that people, talk about the book to their librarian, their local librarian. They might get a copy for their kids' school libraries. And we've already had people doing that, which has been really amazing because that book then will be read by many, many, many people. And we really want that to happen. So we've been really lucky that the book has had very favorable reviews, almost a 5-star rating and 23 reviews on Goodreads right now. We want to also acknowledge the support of all of the Japanese Canadian associations across Canada that supported us early on. Through sponsoring the book, as well as the National Association of Japanese Canadians gave us an endowment fund grant to publish the book, which has helped us out greatly because, like I said, the book is independently published. But we wanted to do it independently because we wanted to get the book out quick. Lily and I were able to turn this book around in less than like 8 months from start to copies in hand. And that's unheard of in the publishing world because if we had published this through a publisher, it'd be 4 years by the time it hit book stands. And we don't want to wait. We want the kids to have it now. So super supportive. The Bulletin, the Nikkei Voice did write-ups for us, front page covers. So we've gotten a lot of great press. Discover Nikkei did a great story. Norm Ibuki did a great story on it. The CBC just recently featured my books as well as On Being Yukiko on a national story. So we're getting national attention now, which is amazing. And yeah, you buy a book, I'll sign it for you. It comes right from my hands. And I know that the books that the Japanese, the Manitoba Association has are all signed. If you have a copy that's signed by Lillian and I, that's probably going to be worth money, because I don't even have a copy that's signed by both Lillian and I. It's either one or the other, I guess. But as you can see, if you go to jcamwpg.ca/shop, you can buy books directly through their shop. If you're based in Winnipeg, I think they'll probably meet you, and you can get it dropped off. If you're not in Winnipeg and you just want to pick up copies, you can order off my store at meditatingbunny.com/store. As you can see there, I will sign every copy that goes through me as well. But you can also get Mixed Critters and Nori and His Delicious Dreams through my store as well online, which is the easiest way to get it. And you can pick up the 3-pack if you need to as well too. So just a little plug on the book. I can put the link down there. But again, if you're in Winnipeg, please support the Japanese Canadian or the Manitoba Association out there. Again, it's worth mentioning, I do have a book distributor for the book, which is awesome, because this will get the book into libraries, universities, and also chapters and other bookstores. So if you have a bookstore that wants to carry the book, or you know somebody, visit sandhillbooks.com, and I'll put those links in during the Q&A. But they can order directly through Sandhill, and this will get the books into libraries and such. So just worth mentioning that if people really want to support the book that way, that's a great way to get your bookstores to stock it, because a lot of bookstores won't buy through me. They buy through distributors. So it's great that we have one. So I always have to plug that when we are doing these presentations, so that people know that if they want to get the books in the bookstores, that's the best way to do it. Lillian has an amazing website as well. Check out more of her work at blakeyart.ca. This is like Tetsuro, the shameless plugs, but very important. I don't think we do this enough, because we got to really promote ourselves during this time as well. So again, I'm Meditating Bunny Studio, Jeff Chiba Stearns, that's me, and On Being Yukiko. And I know that I probably said that wrong, because I actually never learned Japanese growing up, which is one of my biggest regrets in life. And it's not that it was my fault, it was just that it wasn't spoken in my household, and my mother and all her sisters never learned as well, and that's something that comes up quite a bit. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Let's see here. Let's see. How do I do that? How do I stop sharing my screen? Does anyone? Oh, there we go. We're back. Okay. So if you want to, you can keep it on the Brady Bunch Square grid view if you like, or you want to do presenter view, you can hear us speak. But that's essentially our presentation, and I appreciate you guys sticking it out with us. And I will open it up now to any questions, comments, dialogue. If anyone has anything that they'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That was just excellent. I want to commend both of you for sharing your works, and your story is captivating. Thank you. We'll check the chat line. I'm just going to ask you a question, both of you. What are your future plans? Are you working on any projects now, or? Lillian,
you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, right now I'm partnering with a recently retired teacher, and we're writing curriculum. It's a curriculum model to use this book for anti-racist education in schools, and because there are so many teachers who really have a hard time. Because they're nervous about doing it the right way and saying the wrong thing and this kind of thing. So that we think it's really important. We are field testing it at the moment with 2 teachers, one online and one in person. And of course, because of COVID, it just, it's so different from what teachers usually do. But we're hoping, that we'll have a response from them, by the end of the year. And hopefully, I can make a proposal to boards of education by next year sometime. And then also, we've had a lot of requests to translate it into Japanese, because apparently the Japanese in Japan would really be interested in having this story. So So Fumi in the Yukon has enthusiastically taken the task on with his wife. So I guess it'll be done soon. And then hopefully too, you know, we could get it translated into French at some point for, you know, French immersion classes. And, you know, eventually we might do a sequel, but, you know, right now Jeff has really got his plate full with a full-time job. So, you know, we need to take a little breather, I think.
Yeah, I took on a job as a creative director for a new children's show. So it's a puppet animation show. And it's something that, yeah, I was a little hesitant because it's something I haven't done in a while, going back to the animation world. But it's something where now I got kids. It's kind of a fun new adventure. And a steady paycheck. So, you know, it's great though, because the book is still taking off. Like we've sold almost all the books. I think we've only got 500 left, which is amazing because in less than almost 2 months, we've almost sold out. So we'll have to do another run at some point. But that's just a true testament to the community and how much they've supported the project. I'd say the majority of the books sold have been through the community and through the organizations that supported us. So that's huge. You know what I mean? That we've sold almost over 1,500 books so far, and that the book's still busy. Like I'm shipping off books every day. And so that's amazing that we have that much support and such. So it's definitely busy for me because I'm juggling that as well as everything else. But I like it because, hey, you know, we're getting the book out there. So all in due time, I think as Lillian said, she's been really pushing the curriculum and working on the curriculum. I think that's amazing. Even up in the Yukon, they've been pushing it up in their educational system as well too. So things are moving, right? The wheels are turning. And like I said, we really rely on just the support from the community and how much everyone else has been able to help champion the book. Because like I said, being an independent book, we really rely on that support from people just giving it as gifts to their grandkids, to people giving it to their libraries, to people giving it to the universities. That's been huge and really helpful for us to have everyone's support to help distribute the book. So yeah, it's been busy, but it's been a good busy. We're a happy busy.
I'm going to ask the viewers, are there any people who may want to ask questions? You can unmute yourself and just introduce yourself and ask either Jeff or Lillian a question. Anyone out there?
Oh yeah, I do see Jennifer Ashimoto's there. She has a bunch of my books as well too. So if you want to get the Mixed Critters and Nori, she and then you know what? Jennifer just moved to Winnipeg from Toronto. Yeah. And she's been a long time supporter of all things Japanese Canadian and supporting creatives for a long time. So shout out to you, Jennifer. But anybody else have anything you want to share? Any has anyone who's read the book? Anybody read the book with their kids?
Oh, I have.
Awesome.
Yeah. And as was pointed out, the books in Winnipeg are all signed by you, Jeff. So if people are wondering whether they're autographed, they are.
Yeah, my as an animator, I'm okay. My wrist is holding up all right, but I think I've signed almost every single copy, so that's close to almost 1,500 books, and I've drawn something in each one too. So there you go. I'm a sucker for punishment, which is probably why Lillian knows I'm ridiculously busy because I don't know. It's just one of those things.
Well, we have a question from for Lillian from Cheryl and Jeff, and the question: are you still painting? Any exhibitions planned?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I had a joint exhibition with Bryce Kambara, and it was an amazing opening on March the 7th, and then it closed on March the 14th. So on Thursday, I will be going in with him to take the show down, which is really a shame because the immigrant population in Newmarket were really, really so happy that this was happening. So yeah, it's, you know, that show will come down. A lot of stuff has been, you know, done online. I will be, you know, part of another exhibition in Aurora in, I think it's in August. But again, it will probably, I mean, it will be hanging in the you know, the building, but I don't know if people will be allowed to go and see art shows by then.
Right. Yeah. Still restrictions are.
Yeah, and then the other thing that was really disappointing, like this year has been really highs and lows for me. I mean, really, it's just absolutely phenomenal what's happened with working with Jeff. But then the other thing was that I was finally invited to exhibit my work in the Canadian War Museum. But I don't know if that'll happen. You know, they'll be closed for a long time. And that one was really important because 10 years ago, I made a proposal and I just got shifted from one person to the next, to the next, to the next, and nobody would commit. So I just felt that it's really important that our story be in there and not just, you know, accompanying the war machines of Japan. So I guess I was trying to make a statement. We'll see. It might happen one day.
Well, that's good. I know that with the War Museum too, there were some concerns by the NAJC with regard to ways things are portrayed, and they've actually changed it after many years, and the message got through. So you have to sometimes persist, and that's the way it works, I guess. Anyone else have any questions out there? How about the issue with anti-Asian racism that's really prevalent right now? And I know this whole week on television and so on, that's all they talk about is anti-Asian racism. And yeah. How does that, is that a topic that might become part of your works or not? Or is it such a sensitive issue?
Well, you know, from my point of view, the curriculum, you know, the units that we're preparing have 3 different levels to, you know, which teachers can decide to use the book for. And at the highest level, we will be addressing, you know, the effects of colonialism and racism and systemic racism. So, yeah, because it's almost like I feel that it's sort of come full circle. We're sort of back to what my grandparents and parents experienced during the war. Not quite as bad because, you know, they're not taking things away from us, but in terms of the attacks and especially on older people, which I think is disgusting. But I am a little nervous about presenting it to the boards too quickly, because if there's anyone who doesn't really want to address the, you know, the problems for anti-Asian sentiment, I don't know how it will be received. But I do have, you know, people in education right now, you know, so they will let me know, you know, what the climate is.
Right. How about you, Jeff? Any comments there?
Yeah, I think it's really important what Lillian was saying, you know, that it's like, this is why these books are so important. This is why we're creating this content, this media, just to educate and to let people know, you know, what had happened in the past and how it should never be repeated. So it is, you know, disconcerting and disheartening to sort of start seeing this start to rise. And again, it's great that our community is being vocal about it, you know, and that we are discussing this. You know, it's coming up on Facebook, on the groups, and as well as sort of talking about what's going on. There's been safe spaces that have been established so that we can have this dialogue online as well too, because, you know, we're in a really tricky time with the pandemic. You know, it's harder for people to meet in person, to find that sense of community, you know, face to face like we used to, right? There's a lot more support when we could all meet in a room and, you know, be physically present. You know, I think now it's been very tricky because we're mobilizing online, which again gives us a wider reach, a bigger presence, but again, harder to sort of, you know, I guess, connect in a way that I think is important that we used to. So, you know, I think I've thought a lot about this because as someone who is mixed Japanese, you know, I'm very aware of my white privilege, you know, and the fact that I don't look Japanese as I walk down the street. I don't, you know, I don't present as Japanese, I think, to a lot of people when they see me. But yet, I look at my children and they look a lot, you know, Yuki is more Japanese looking in my eyes. And I do worry, right? I worry about my mother. I worry about my own family. And so again, it's how do we get the dialogue going beyond our community as well? And I think that's an important step. And so as Lillian was mentioning, if we can get the book into curriculums and into schools and get teachers behind us, then at least that dialogue is happening. That dialogue can happen in the place where it needs to happen, which is, you know, in youth, because they are the future. And we're hoping that as they get more educated and know more about the story and the history of Japanese Canadians, you know, that they're going to realize that we all have rich, you know, histories, and that those should be celebrated. As much, you know, as there's a lot of trauma and things that we need to work out. And so it's tough, but like as Lillian was saying, you know, she's put a lot of work in this curriculum, and I'm really hoping that those teachers see it as a beneficial thing to help talk about, you know, the anti-Asian racism that's happening around us. But again, groups like NAJC, you know, and yours have been very instrumental, I think, in getting this dialogue, you know, and keeping the dialogue going, so we can discuss this. So, and again, what you guys did in the 80s, you know, with the redress, you know, that's why we put that part of history in the book as well too, because we need to have people who stand up for us, you know, and give us a voice. And so I think that helps inspire the next generation to see that as well.
Thank you. Well, you know, the comments that we're receiving, people are very grateful for your presentations. It was just captivating, really. And Lillian, your paintings, just excellent. You know, it creates a feeling of importance and telling our story, which is so important. We have to keep doing that. So I appreciate both of you coming this evening to share your stories, and hope to see you in Winnipeg at some point.
Yeah, I hope we can make it back. You know, I missed the pierogies.
All right.
And Art, you know all the good restaurants too, Art. So that's the other good thing too.
Anyways, thank you. And I guess since Tetsuro's gone to teach, I can't thank him personally, but I wanted to thank him through the audience here for his participation as well.